signed into law. Tennessee, Thursday, became the latest state to enact a law banning gender-affirming health care for transgender youth. Alabama, Arkansas, Arizona, Mississippi, South Dakota, and Utah have also enacted bans on the life-saving treatment. The new Mississippi bill blocks public funding for clinics and institutions that offer this type of care. This comes as Nebraska State Senator Michaela Cavanaugh has vowed to bring the state legislature to a halt with a filibuster if lawmakers try to pass anti-trans bills.
If this legislature collectively decides that legislating hate against children is our priority, then I am going to make it painful for everyone. Because if you want to inflict pain upon our children, I am going to inflict pain upon this body. There's not a bill on this agenda, on any agenda coming forward, that will be spared. Every bill will go to cloture.
Meanwhile, Tennessee's Republican Governor Bill Lee has faced backlash after a high school photo of him dressed in drag went viral, after he said he would sign a bill criminalizing drag performances performed in public or in front of children. Nationwide, at least 14 bills have been introduced targeting drag shows. In Montana, the House endorsed a bill that, barring anyone under age 18 from attending drag shows, even after emotional testimony from one of the legislature's first openly transgender members, Representative Zooey Zephyr.
The bill purports to be about drag, and let me start by saying what drag is. Drag is art, drag is beautiful, drag is important to my community. My community and the rest of the LGBTQ community. There were comments about people who had gone 30 years ago to drag shows and saw adult-focused experiences. There's questions as to why are children coming to them now? Well, I'll tell you what happened. We lived through the AIDS epidemic. We lived through people trying to disallow our marriage. We adopted children. We grew up. And now we're taking some of our children and sharing an art form that's valuable to our community in a way that is age appropriate to them. That's why if you would have come to the drag show on Saturday, what you would have seen is people in full-length dresses, in beautiful gowns, celebrating our art, our history, and the fact that we're alive today.
For more on all of this, we're joined in New York by Chase Stranger, Deputy Director for Trans Justice with the ACLU LGBTQ and HIV Project. Chase, welcome back to Democracy Now! Talk about what happened in Tennessee and talk about what's happening across this country after that very powerful testimony.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I mean, I've been coming on the show for the last 7 years to talk about this very issue, and I think taking a step back, what we have to acknowledge is how quickly this has escalated. In 2016, in the wake of marriage equality, we saw the first aggressive contemporary backlash against trans people in the form of the wave of anti-trans bathroom bills. And that rhetoric escalated to attacks on trans participation in sports, attacks on trans youth in schools, using the restroom, participating on sports teams. And how quickly have we gone from that rhetoric, which was understood to be false, including by proponents of it, to this current climate in which we are criminalizing trans adults going to the bathroom, where we are banning evidence-based medical care that is supported by every major medical association, where we are criminalizing gender expression and drag performance. And now we hear the rhetoric behind all of this, which at its core has always been about pushing trans people out of public life and eradicating transness. We see it so clearly, and if we look over the course of 7 years, this arc brings us to this moment where we are absolutely in crisis.
So talk specifically about Tennessee and
So I'm gonna pause us right there and have us think about what are some things that stand out in this video. What are some stories that were being told? What are some narratives that are being shared, and who, right, is given the space for these narratives? So a lot of things that I think we don't discuss is how these types of legislations, right, are furthering essentially larger budgets for policing, larger budgets for incarceration. So thinking about all of these under that context, right? What are some things that stood out to folks? I really like the comment that the person from the ACLU said, right? What are the legislations really doing? And it's thinking about pushing trans people out of public life, right? Because what can you do when you don't have access to restrooms, when you are susceptible to community violence because of not conforming to gender presentations or gender norms, right? Um, the use of children for every justification, definitely. Chella?
Hey everyone, my name is Chella. I go by she and they. I'm also part of Stop LAPD Spying. Anyway, so it's funny because I accidentally followed somebody that's against drag. Because on Instagram their name is BLM Chinatown, which I thought that was like Black Lives Matter, you know? And we've had some really intense conversations. And he, you know, just like thinking around, number one, the children, you just named this, Kim, the children, everybody's mentioning the children. And it's so funny because like nobody's mentioning the children when these rich white kids are coming on these shows like TRs and whatever that show was called about fucking pageants. John Benet Ramsey, you know, thinking about that, thinking about the fact that like literally we are groomed. We are grooming little girls, like literally cishet people groom little girls, like literally. And then they want to talk about us grooming. And it's funny because here's the sad notion, y'all. A long time ago, I don't know if y'all remember seeing the Young Turks. I don't know if y'all know who they are, but one of the reporters was talking about abortion rights, and she's like, "I don't care if your God is telling you this. I don't care. Like, I will fight for you to have that right to believe that. But at the end of the day, I'm gonna start caring when your right to do that inflicts my right to autonomy with my own body." And I was like, yeah. And then I was talking to a friend who used to be Christian, right? And I used to be Christian. They're like, the sad thing is, they're doing what they think is in God's, you know, they think that God wants them to do this, you know. One more thing, there's this saying that like Christianity, Muslim, and Judaism argue about so many different things. One of the only things they can come together on is the hatefulness of trans and queer people, right? And it's funny because like literally there's I don't remember what state, but there is a group of people that are Christian siding with a lot of folks that are Muslim to get things out of schools and you know, and it's just really showing what, you know, what they're trying to do to us, right? They think that they think by doing this that we will not be there, will be no more trans people, there'll be no more queer people. No, we'll just make safe spaces for that. We've always had to. That is the punk way, real talk, and that is the queer way. I like the interchangeableness of queerness and punkness. And I think I'm gonna be honest, I'm scared, you know. I'm scared of, while I'm saying that, I'm also scared, you know, as a trans woman, as somebody who does do shows out in the open. And I know that it's not happening here yet, but like there's like, you know, it's only a matter of time, you know. Um, but yeah, so that's what I have to say about that.
Thank you so much, Chella, for those meditations and testimonials. And A few things that I want to highlight that you said are the unlikely coalitions that are happening against trans people, right? And I would also extend that against queer trans people and sex workers is how we see attacks on, right? There's like verifications now if you want to access porn. There's a lot of attacks with online sex work that are going on. So thinking about how really anything that destabilizes our idea of what a normal sexuality looks like, which is quote unquote straight, right? Someone who is middle class and is able to express their sexuality due to their class status. And I just want to highlight some of the things from the chat. Maggie said, transness equal threat to heteronormative Christian idea of cultural and biological reproduction, right? So in thinking about our ideas of the nuclear family, right? Relationships then become a mode to kind of normalize this production of this nuclear family unit to then reproduce workers that are able to be expendable. So the idea of transness and queerness not having a productive outcome, right? When it comes to, for example, sex, there's no reproduction in a way that benefits capitalism. So I really appreciate your comment, Maggie. And Austin said, just read a great audiobook on Spotify called Homosexuality and Class Warfare. I loved it. Ian said, also continuing a historical trend in America of treating children as property, parental rights, arguments as justifications for promoting the indoctrination of children in their homes and removing their autonomy / freedom to learn and experience all. And then Samarta said, exactly, drag ban is same as book banning, restriction of children's autonomy and right to learn. So what is the intersection between transgender and drag? And Maggie responded, I think gender play could be one, power and femininity. Does anyone want to expand on that question? The intersection between
I do.
drag.
I do.
Go ahead, Chala.
So I think for ages, what we call, number one, a lot of people like to loop transness and with drag king or drag, right? But like a lot of people get it wrong about who threw the first boot at the Stonewall Rebellion, right? So I think there's always been, I think the person that said there's always been something around gender play, like this like fear, right? We are this thing to be feared. When you're giving up a gender or when you're presenting certain ideologies and or actions of the other gender, there's something to be feared. We're coming for your kids. We're coming for we're coming for the men. We're stealing the men. We're doing all these different shit, right? A lot of people do. It's funny because a lot of trans people have done drag before as well, right? Like there's that, right? There's a lot of folks, especially on Drag Race, that like have come out as trans in the years since they've done Drag Race. But it's not always the opposite. Not all drag people are trans, right? So there's this thing about gender, about it being played with, right? There's Bible verses. Yeah, I used to be super Christian, so I could do this. There's Bible verses that talk about men wearing women's garments and how that's like solely against the word of God. There's, so like a lot of people use that. There's also like a verse that talks about the effeminate. And so, I just think there's this threat to them. There's this threat that like men are not wanting to be men. It's funny because I used to see this more so like policing this within same cultures. Like if you're Latino, you're more you're more so gonna like rag on somebody that's Latina or Latino that's like trying to be trans or drag queen or drag king. If you're Black, there's so much gender policing. I mean, we just also got to think about the gender policing in the 80s and 70s. It was like literally if you had your hair short for a woman, you were not considered, pretty. If you had your hair long as a man, you were not considered manly. even though like 80s and 90s like metal, I hope I'm making sense, but I think there's just always this fear that we are going to lead the children and the world down to this world of hell with gender play. And like literally gender play is like one of the most sacred things. But yeah, I hope I answered the question. There's also other folks that can answer. I just saw that and I really wanted to put my 10 cents in. So I would love to hear somebody else's thoughts.
Thank you, Chela. Austin, did you want to share?
Yeah, I just as well wanted to expand on this audiobook I got into. It's very telling of this chat, and it's perfect timing for me. It gave historical context to the war on homosexual as well as like cross-dressing in ancient times, and they brought that even to like a religious state of mind, how people were worshiping the mother versus the father, and how the church became the first corporation, and how Roman armies, and to have soldiers in a certain frame of mind to erase the sensuality, the femininity, to keep people in line a certain way. Just thought it was very telling and a lot of information, very enlightening.
Hello there, sir. If you're going to speak at that volume, can you take it to the front of the library, please?
Sorry about that.
Thank you.
So I'll just say that for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Austin. Definitely, right? So, and I just wanted to kind of take us back a little bit. And the way that we're thinking about gender is as something that we're not born into, right? We're thinking about gender as something that we socially constructed as a society, as a community, in the same way that we think about sex, right? Your genitals don't say man or woman, right? In our very limited binary, that's not, we didn't come out the womb with like our label. That's something that we as humans ascribe to. And even with sex, there's intersex people, right? That show us that binaries within sex are not something essential to biology, if that makes sense. We see it across the animal kingdom, right? There's different ways that animal species create families. The male seahorse, right, gets pregnant. So it literally goes against our binaristic thinkings of penis equal man and vagina equal woman. Which is something that we ourselves, right, as people, and I shouldn't say we, because it's not like I colonized the Americas and was like, you're not doing this correct, right? You have to be punished. And that goes to my next point. Well, first, I wanted to ground us with our statement of principles. And one of our principles is commitment to trans, femme, gender nonconforming, and LGBTIQ liberation. We must confront our personal and our communities' homophobia, transphobia, anti-LGBTIQ sentiments, and hateful and harmful policies. So something that I just wanted to bring us to was this emblematic image that that shows, sorry, I don't know where my notes went. But basically, this image shows what is now so-called Panama, right? And the conquistadores here at the top. And in the emblematic image, it says, oh, here are my notes. 1594, Theodore de Bry published this image of this moment with the text as part of the Grand Voyages series, right? So when colonizers went to colonize the Americas and other continents, they would send back letters to the crown with images. And this image depicts the fierce dogs down here attacking and devouring several nearly naked and apparently quote unquote male-bodied indigenous people in the lower field, while Balboa, the conquistador, and his conquistadores elaborately decorated and posed looking on from above. So this just kind of, I use this all the time when I teach because I think it makes it reminds us, right, that different cultures, different communities have had different ways of being, right, that aren't gendered in the same binary ways that we have here today in the US. So when we think about trans, right, we don't want to say like, oh, there was trans people back in 1594, because they may not have identified as trans, right? That's an English word, that whatever. So it's thinking about these different gender presentations that existed, that were thriving, but due to religion and colonization and enslavement, right, a lot of discipline went into creating basically our gender system that we have today. Okay, and there's a couple comments as well, so I just want to take a quick chat second. So non-religious people are also indoctrinated into this sort of mentality by the strict, some things are good and some things are bad. If you try to think critically about this, you're just justifying evilness, moralistic rhetoric. Definitely, right? Oh, I didn't know about that movie, Austin, the movie 1946, which is where the term homosexuality was coined. So, in thinking about these colonial legacies of gender and sexuality, there's also a lot of feminist theorists, Black feminist theorists, that talk about the Middle Passage, which is during the transatlantic slave trade, right? The Middle Passage was where a lot of folks didn't make it to the Americas after being captured and enslaved. A lot of Black feminists think about this rupture within humanity, right, where indigenous people and Black people didn't neatly fit into these binaries because we weren't considered human to begin with. So if you're not considered human, how are you going to be a boy or a girl or a man or a woman, right? You were considered either a savage or you were considered property. So feminists of color kind of go back to these moments, right, to help us think about why is it that racialization and the way that gender operates isn't always even across race and cultures. And that's something that Chela also brought up, right? How within our own cultures, we like to police who should look what way based on our own, right, historical traumas of being disciplined. Sorry, that's my chihuahua. Anyone have any thoughts, comments, questions? Have y'all heard about these things before? Anything that's sticking out? Samar?
I feel like it's worth mentioning that in many, non-European societies, there have been like historical gender identities beyond male and female that have really rich histories. But as soon as, colonizers came in and brought their existing social norms with them, all of these subcultures, I'd say, were either, mostly eradicated or made much less socially acceptable than they were before.
Definitely, right? As we saw in the image and even in historical documents, what's the term? Historical documents that were about the Middle Passage, we see a lot of these brutal violences occurring, but people are still resisting. And we still see this today, right? There's Mushe, which is very specific to the Isthmus Zapotec region, which is in English considered the third gender, but it's not necessarily a gender, right? And this goes back to our questions around drag and trans people, right? And thinking about gender as something that we do every day. and something that's so delicate, so unstable in terms of the gender binary, right? For example, what are some things that people do to present themselves as a woman or a man in those binary terms? Like, what are things that are done to do that?
Like you said, they're definitely stereotypical, but you know, long nails for women, long hair for women, um, you know, doing makeup to the T for a woman. Let's see. I think that's a lot. For men, it's lifting weights, getting muscle mass, shortening your hair. Um, yeah, that's what I have to say. I'm sorry, I should have raised my hand. That's not mute.
Definitely. Thank you, Chilla. So just wanted to highlight what Ian was saying. Transphobia in America is also used to justify harming cis women of color who don't conform to expectations of white femininity, seen as too masculine or too dangerous. And definitely, right, we see that with the athlete Samaya, and how she's always, I think that's her name, Samaya, and how she's always consistently being policed about whether her body is too masculine to compete with the category of women. Shaving for women is a big expectation in the West. Hairiness associated with masculinity. And Austin says maybe it has to do with the concentration of power knowledge. Definitely, right? So we see throughout history also how gender presentation and the correct way to perform a gender changes over time, right? Where pink used to be, for example, a manly color, and now it's seen as a feminine. Or going back to the way that what Ian's comment said, right? How transphobia in America is also used to harm cis women of color, right? Thinking about how cis women of color also are transphobic, right? When really the category of womanhood hasn't always been, again, open to women of color due to colonization and slavery. So yes, definitely, transphobia is part of othering. So I just wanted us to kind of highlight some trans and queer resistance over the years and really think about how I just read Captive Genders by Eric Stanley. If anyone's interested, I have the PDF, or maybe I could drop it right here. Like, is it too large of a file? I recommend everyone read it. It's really good. But there's the first chapter called Flesh or something like that. I forgot what it's called. Where essentially they are thinking about Stonewall, right, as also an abolitionist event, which I don't think gets enough credit for that. And definitely, right, I think, so Stonewall is a very famous 2-day riot that happened in New York. Does anyone want to give more context on what Stonewall is? So it's kind of seen as the start of mainstream LGBTQ organizing, right? The Stonewall riots. But a lot of people like to sanitize the history of Stonewall to make it less radical, right? Like we usually do. So, for example, last Pride, Chella, along with folks in Queer Apocalypse, organized the Queer Apocalypse in protest to West Hollywood's Pride, making the chief of sheriffs, or the captain of the sheriffs, their grand marshal. Which again, right, if Pride, the month of Pride, was designed to celebrate queer history because of Stonewall happening in Pride, how does a cop become the grand marshal, right? Because Stonewall was a riot against cops, because in 1969 and even before that, and even currently in our moment, right, folks needed to wear at least 3 articles of clothing that was representative of their gender in their government ID. So for trans people, for people who did drag, right, or really for anyone who didn't want to dress a specific way, they were prone to being criminalized and incarcerated. But especially trans women and trans women of color. So here in Stonewall, where we had the emergence of organizers like Marsha P. Johnson and Silvia Rivera, 2 very prominent Latinx and Black trans women who were also sex workers and organized with their own funds, right, and own money, and always disrupted mainstream LGBTQ events. So I just wanted to kind of give a context of how we're thinking and framing gender and sexuality. And I wanted to go to Chela to kind of give us, oh no, before that, sorry. I wanted to talk about the California bill that would require schools to notify parents if their child is transgender. So we see all these bills popping up in other states, right? And I think, maybe I should say me as a Californian, who's, you know, hasn't lived in any other state, always feels some type of disconnection that things are happening in other states, but not here, right? Like Roe v. Wade, for example. But this California bill is wild. Has anyone heard about it? It's Assembly Bill 1314. Let me just drop it in the chat. Yes, Ian, I love that speech. Sylvia made a powerful speech at a Pride rally in the 70s about the transphobia and especially trans misogyny in the gay community at the time. And you can find the speech on Vimeo. It's really powerful, but also heartbreaking, because we see Sylvia almost yell for her life and the life of other people that are, you know, fighting similar fights, and white queers are just kind of ignoring her or resisting, right, to give up that space. So yeah, the bill, I dropped it in the chat. Assembly Bill 1314 would require school districts to notify parents in writing within 3 days after learning a student is identifying as a gender that doesn't align with official records of their birth certificate. So I love that the chat is popping off, but I feel like I can't what's the word? I can't moderate it as well as I would like to. But it's AB 1314. And I think this is a really important bill, right, that we could talk about in terms of is there organizing efforts, or maybe we don't think the likelihood of this bill passing, you know, is high. So what are folks' thoughts? Why do we think this is dangerous, right?
Yeah, I mean, just as we started the conversation talking about like people using children as their excuse again, it's that same thing that we're seeing yet and again, where it's like they're saying, oh, parents play a critical role in nurturing and supporting the children, so they need to know everything that's going on. It can't be removed from the equation. But yeah, there's a different equation that's happening here that's not good. But yeah, it's all this in the name of, you know, concerned parents as per usual. It's ridiculous.
I'm not sure if anyone else is going next. Hi, folks. My name is Mariela Saba. I'm also part of Stop the APD Spying Coalition, and thanks for bringing this bill. I was not aware of it. But just the framing of LA Times, or the way it's posed, is as if being transgender is bad and to be criminalized. That's the feeling I get just reading it. And it makes me think about our work in our coalition around information sharing, and so it just creates this it's just another link between schools and parents, and probably police, and policing within those different institutions. And yeah, it's just, yeah, it is. I'd be happy to do more about it. I'm glad you're bringing it here. And in July, I'm organizing a youth retreat with trans and queer youth here in California. So I will bring it to the table at our next meeting.
I believe the scariest part about these bills that require school staff to be mandatory reporters for students that are queer is that it will the most affect students that are already in uncomfortable, unsafe situations at home, because likely if they were safe at home, they would be able to talk to their parents without a school official getting in the way of that. So it is targeting the trans kids that are already the most in danger.
And I just wanted to uplift Samar's comment before going on Chela. And Samar highlighted intersex children are pressured into doing sex change surgeries all the time, and nobody talks about it. Actually, intersex children being surgically altered to conform binary viewpoints is basically the only sex changes being performed on young children. Definitely, Samar. And even when we think about, for example, I know a lot of people like to condemn other countries for doing female genital mutilation, right? But we don't, I feel like there's no self-awareness in the mutilation that's going on with intersex children. Chela?
Oh, sorry. So I'm gonna try to make this quick. Yes to what you just said, Cam, and yes, there's actually real quick made me think of the story I watched about 3 weeks ago. I can find it for folks if they want. About a man and like not a man. He's a man. He was pressured as a young person. He was intersex, and he was pressured to become a woman. And like all his life, he did not feel like a woman. And so like they would give him the doctor would meet him every year and like do all these tests, and this is like the 40s or 50s, I think, something around that time. And then later on in life, like he tried to commit suicide. And that's when the doctor finally was like, okay, we're gonna listen to you. What do you want? And he was like, I think I'm a man. And and that's where I might have these things that are, I might have this and this, but I'm a man. And so like literally he was like, okay, the doctor finally listened to them. And long story short, trigger warning, unliving yourself. Even he got married to a woman and like told her his story, and they got a divorce, and then like he unlived himself just because of all the trauma that had happened. But that, it's, I find it really interesting around that because like, thinking about forced surgeries too, right? Like I have a lot of friends who are like literally like 200, 300 pounds at the age of like 10 or 11, and parents force them to get like that lose weight surgery without going to the cause of what created that, right? Like I'm not fat phobic. I believe that there's reasons that people are the way they are. Now getting back to the gender and sexuality thing. It reminds me of what's going on in Uganda, y'all. Like literally people are turning in their neighbors to the cops, right? And like, I forget how many years you can get for being queer or trans, like literally. And if you are caught being queer or trans. That's another, that, you know, and people are like encouraged by the state to tell on their neighbors, like the say something, but in that realm. And people are just like, some of them are like trying to get the, you know, there's even a story of a person that was queer that like shifted the blame on their neighbor and was like, I'm not queer, they are, you know? And it's like, it's creating this paranoia, y'all. And it's crazy because like who introduced them to that shit? The British. Um, but yeah, I hope I made sense. Muting.
Thank you so much, Chella, for uplifting that. Definitely. And I just learned actually that the same folks that were part of a traffic hub to kind of shut down Pornhub because of the conflation of sex trafficking and creating porn, right, were the same folks that were going to Uganda and really lobbying and funding these anti-LGBT bills. So we can see, right, the clear connection between policing anyone that doesn't fit into what we consider quote unquote normal, right? Based on assumptions related to everybody's gender and sexuality. And Ian says the Uganda bill is sponsored by foundations responsible for anti-queer legislation in America too. Continuation of the legacy of colonialism enforcing gender binaries and heteronormativity. Definitely, right? And I want to go back to Austin's comment about Iran, because a lot of times I think in the US, we like to shake our finger, right, at other countries and saying like, look at us, like we're not criminalizing queer people, but we are. So thinking about how, right, the root of a lot of these anti-queer legislations comes from colonialism and slavery, and how those legacies don't just disappear because those events are quote unquote over, quote unquote, in the past, right? So definitely, thank you all so much for being in the chat too. And I wanted to pivot back to Chella, who organizes Queer Apocalypse, and this last Friday was Trans Day of Visibility. But Chella hosted a Trans Day of Reclamation in Echo Park. And we wanted to hear a little bit more about that and the bigger history of Queer Apocalypse. If you could share with us, Chella.
Yeah, hey, so my name's Chella. I've been organizing in LA for the greater 10 or 11 years around all sorts of intersecting subjects, from homelessness to sex work to food insecurity to like a bunch of shit. And in 2019, I joined a band. Well, I started a band. And as a way to like just get my band out there and get my band noticed, I started this concert at first called Queer Apocalypse. Now, it was just a way for me to get my band, as well as other trans and queer bands of color, noticed. You know, because I do feel like I want to shake this. I do want to shake this world on its head. I do want to make this world, quote unquote, safer for the Black queer kid and the Black trans kid and the Black intersex kid, right? And the undocumented, all those things, or the, you know, all the all the oppression folks. So, but then COVID happened. And so there was just nothing, you know. We met like about 7 months into COVID. We met just to do a normal show, a normal rehearsal. And then in July of that year, 2021, I believe, there was going to be a big, I'm doing my best to like shorten this. I got asked by a friend who works with Trans Latina Coalition. And so they're kind of in the know about Pride doing something and co-opting the Black Lives Matter movement and co-opting George Floyd and Brittany Taylor and Tony McDade, and just co-opting that, right? And I was like, okay, let's see who's organizing it. And it turned out that I knew some of the folks that were organizing it, right? And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna give them 3 days, and this is the week of the actual event. I'm gonna give them 3 days to answer these questions. Pretty much, is it gonna be ableist, or is it gonna be disabled inclusive? You know, is it going? Can my band play? The second one, and the third one was it pro cop? Because like I had been hearing that they had a cop that was gonna be on the thing, and they didn't answer me. But I did get an answer for the disabled question the day before from a friend who was at this meeting. Somebody had asked one of the organizers, what about people who are in wheelchairs? They said, well, they can drive here. Um, so we went and took it over. So from that moment, we've been doing takeovers. I kind of like realized that was like, I am from the 90s. So, just doing it Rage Against the Machine style, going out and, we've done it at the intersection of Santa Monica and San Vicente. We've done it at Echo Park. We have done it on the corner of Logan and Sunset, so we just take up space and declare we are here. We are trans and queer. And we are not going anywhere. And so this year, I was already going to do a queer apocalypse yet again. I got called on by my friend who's with TLC, Trans Latina Coalition. Was like, hey, do you want to join forces? And it was, yeah, we were like, yeah. Knowing that there was another protest, going on, but we made it a little bit later, so that we still have time, because I think there's no amplified sound after 10. But we late to everything, so that we didn't stop until 10:30. But it was cute. This last Friday, we had a few performers. For those that don't know, we have a new drummer in my band, and so my old drummer is in another group with their partner, and they performed. Then my bassist has their own stuff, so they do their own stuff there too. And then we had another Black trans woman DJ come. Her name's DJ Fronthole. Well, actually, she changed her name. I forgot what it was. But yeah, it was lit. It was lit and punk, and just people were coming through, and this was at the park, right? So like literally, you had people that were like knowing what we were doing, that were coming, that were like, oh, we got here from the other protest because we saw that we're doing this, and some folks that said that we just saw it on your Facebook, on your Insta, we saw it on this, and then there are some folks that were like, we just heard the music, we wanted to see what was going on. Uh, it was more people than I thought would show out. I think we had a group of at least coming in and out, at least 60 to 70, which was more than I thought. Real talk. Thought it was only going to be 20 something. Um, but yeah, so we're continuing to do that and push back. We're definitely going to do some more this year. And we are definitely also just going to do shows, because I do like, I'm very political, but I'm also like, sometimes you just want to have fun. Everything is political though, so like us taking up space, no matter where it's at, it's going to be political. So yeah, I think there was something to be said that of it being all trans people, predominantly trans folks of color. And like literally my band is just lit, even that's a 3-piece band now. We're just the bass, my vocals, and Maya's vocals sometimes, and the drum. And we take over that space and do it and do the fucking thing. And we always end it with the Asada Shakur chant, to unify us. It's kind of, people have said it's kind of cultish, and I'm like, well, I would love to be in the Asada Shakur cult, because she's about unity and not about drinking Kool-Aid in your life, So, and I hate to say it like that, but that's true. So yeah, doing takeovers is what I love to do. We usually start to, like, if something's coming up we're in April now, right? April, May, I forgot. We're in April now
April.
because April Fools. Yeah, April Fools just passed. That's true. So if something's coming up in May, I usually start to try to do it now, like organize it. I'm like reaching out to performers already. I'm like, hey, you can do this. So yeah, so if you have, a space y'all want us to come take over, let us know. We've also done balls, like Vogue balls, in coalition with Trans Latina Coalition again. Challenging. We did a cancel the rent ball, which was great. The band didn't play, but I got to judge, and it was so much fun. And yeah, it's just amazing. It's fun, but it's also, it's also sometimes a little dangerous. I'm going to be honest and say the last 3 times haven't been that much pushback, 3 or 4 times. But when we first started, the cops would come out in galore. We've also done it in Skid Row. We did and usually with Skid Row, I like to give out, be honest, I like to give out things that people need to survive. So I'm gonna say on that one because we are able to listen to. So yeah, look us up on Instagram, Queerpocalypse 2020, because that's when we started. Or follow the band. You guys suck like real hard. I will text it. It's a long name. So yeah, if you have any questions, now's the time. Or forever hold your peace.
Thank you so much, Chella. Y'all do amazing work with Queerpocalypse. We did get pushback last year during Pride from not cops, but people, drunk people who were annoyed that we were reminding them that the first Pride was a riot and not some kind of party, right? And I've also linked, not that partying is bad, right? But just to remind ourselves our roots, our abolitionist roots of Pride and Stonewall. I linked Queerpocalypse 2020's Instagram on the chat. If you're interested, please take a follow. If you're interested in organizing with Chella. And yeah, I just had a couple guiding questions for us to kind of think about together. If anyone has questions for Chella before we move on.
Future Queerpocalypse visions, anything you want to share?
Yeah, actually, I think somebody named that I'm really good at facilitating, probably because of my TO/theater of the oppressed background, but I would love to do something around that in Queerpocalypse. I would also love to do like documentary screenings to because not everybody learns differently. Let's be real. I don't learn by reading. How I learned about the oppressions and things I've known is through other documentaries and or listening to people's stories. So like somebody was like, you should just start doing something around, showing a documentary once a week, and we could do it online first just to test it. And then, when we have spaces that are available, when COVID is more died down, because I am immunocompromised and I've had COVID twice already. I would love to do that. I would also love to see it not just be in LA, I think Queerpocalypse is needed in different spaces and taking it to like Mexico or taking it to like fucking the IE, taking it to the Bay, so like that kind of thing. I am also, want to start sharing the labor because the labor is a lot for me. I find myself tired when I get there and like I can't enjoy it sometimes because I'm like stressing and I shouldn't stress, but like I do. We can tell ourselves not to stress, not to, but we're gonna do it when we're organizing shit because it's just we want things to work out, So those things. I would also love to like have self-defense courses under Queerpocalypse, right? Like, and I mean actual self-defense against like attackers, because I do live in Skid Row, y'all. I live on 6th and San Pedro, and some of my neighbors, literally, you hear them crying out for help, and it's like, I'm disabled in my walker. If I saw it, I would try to help. I would yell at them. I can't physically, interact, but it would be cute to like have a different person come under it and teach us some shit, So those things. I have big visions for Queerpocalypse. Thank you, Maria. Maria. I don't know how to say Maria. One more thing. The last protest at Pride, we actually teamed up with Familia, which is what Mariela works with. So thank y'all for helping last year. But yeah.
Mariela, do you want to say something quick about Familia? Mariela, as one of the co-founders of Familia, did you want to share some?
Sorry. I'm with my babies and there was some really loud screaming. They're having fun.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. So I totally missed the question. You were just asking me if you wanted to share on behalf of Familia? Sure. Happy to. I could share on a lot of different things, but I want to share what I touched on earlier. That's one of the things that I'm co-organizing with 3 trans and queer youth, a youth retreat, a healing justice-based youth retreat in July 6th through 9th. It was going to be in March originally, but there was a state of emergency storm out here in the mountains in San Bernardino. So we're going to get some really nice time in nature together.
We watched with scary animals.
Jumanji for sure.
Aww.
Yeah, and my children will be included too. And
She's Wednesday.
oh, you called Kim. I think they called you Wednesday, Kim.
The bangs and the
Black hair.
Yes, go black hair. Let's see. So yeah, I want to share that. Maybe at a future meeting we can bring on the youth organizers to hear from them. I just sent them an email about the California bill, so we could have that on our radar as a healing justice organizing team. And then Familia is also doing a campaign called Familia en el Sur, going through different states impacted by the anti-trans bills and doing listening sessions and connecting with other organizers on the ground. So, but I'm positioned here in Cali, and I'm just thinking about how I can do something about all those bills, predominantly in the South, but in a lot of places, and we're talking about hundreds of bills, hundreds of attacks, and just all this, yeah, dangerous political games. And just really want to think about how we as a movement center children and youth who are the scapegoats or the targets and the already vulnerable populations, powerful populations who are being antagonized and criminalized. And so I just want, yeah, more, as much of these conversations and actions, more support, a lot of spaces for queer joy and joy for young people. Yeah, I think that'll be really helpful in how we how we overcome these times. And just look out for young folks, just encouraging them that we're taking extra care. All ages, but young people are being attacked directly.
Definitely. I feel like a lot of times we don't think about children as an oppressed class who don't have voting rights, are pretty much subject to their parents. And even in organizing spaces, right, we treat them as something that we need to kind of push aside or not integrate within our within whatever we're doing, right? But thank you so much, Mariela, for touching base on familia. And thank you, Chela, for giving us a report back on queer apocalypse and a brief history. That was really beautiful to hear. Just kind of a closing question for us before we go to any community announcements, right? I kind of we wanted everyone to kind of think together, right? How can we learn from trans and queer liberation fights to influence our abolitionist movements? And Mariela already suggested something wonderful, right? For us to integrate more young people, more youth, more children. Especially, yeah, they are the targets of a lot of misinformation, but also like, books are being banned, critical race theory is being banned, anything that's teaching children to think outside of what is kind of the normal ideology of the US, right, is being banned. So I would love to see what popular education looks like in a queer, trans way. And we have popular education here with the folks doing work on the war on youth, which meets next Tuesday, the fight against the war on youth, if you're interested. Samar?
On that topic of children's rights and how a lot of resources for education for children are being banned, I think it's very important to have, ways for children to learn and, communicate with each other and share knowledge outside of schools, within schools, places where kids can talk to each other and learn different viewpoints. Because I know from being, in high school and everything, it's very difficult to actually find chances to communicate with other people, other youth, without it being policed by authorities.
Definitely. Thank you for that, Samar. Yeah, I just read an article that talked about like Latinas accessing sex ed. And a lot of the sex ed educators would say, well, why do you want to know about that, when they would ask specific questions? And it's like, isn't that the point of sex ed? Right. So it's, again, this authority over what is appropriate for children to learn and what's not, even when it includes their own livelihoods, like things like consent, things like gender identity, somehow become the right for parents, but not the right for children to know, even though that's their own body, their own autonomy, let them have. Thank you all so much for this amazing conversation. Yeah, for closing, we just have some ongoing fights, and I want to remind folks of, we do have a criminalization of sex work working group where we look at the way that sex work is being criminalized. We are focusing specifically on Super Bowl 2022 that happened last year, and trying to look at trends of what happened in terms of the raids that were supposed to target human trafficking, right? But a lot of times LAPD uses human trafficking as a guise to hire their budgets. And when we get the data of the people who were actually arrested, it's almost little to none that were part of any type of trafficking, right? Or a lot of times we have folks that, sorry, I got distracted by the chat. We have folks that are, or sex workers who are youth, right, are kind of assumed to be trafficked because they're youth and can't legally consent. So there's a lot of criminalization of sex work and sexuality in general, and we have a working group on that. We're still trying to get enough folks to kind of establish a set meeting. And Matios highlighted in the chat, we've had an incredible group of youth between 1st and 6th grade working through some abolitionist curriculum. We've created, the objective has been to cultivate a culture of resistance, especially autonomous resistance among youth as surveillance efforts ramp up in schools. And there is an exhibition event happening at UCLA Law on April 15th at 10:45 a.m. where you could see the interactive workshop showcasing the youth's art. Yeah, thank you for highlighting that, Matios. And again, that meeting, the Fight Against the War on Youth community meeting, is next Tuesday. Same time, and our links are always available on our website, which I posted on the chat. Does anyone else want to have a community announcement they want to make? Okay, well, thank you all so much, folks. This was a lovely conversation on very difficult topics that are affecting ourselves and others. And again, I just want to highlight how in order for our liberation to happen, right, we have to be tied and bound with everybody else's. So in thinking about our own personal lives, how are we combating transphobia? How are we having these conversations with our elders, right, who oftentimes think about these issues as only relevant or only new? How are we having these conversations with our parents, with our neighbors? How are we holding space for queer and trans youth to feel safe, right, in whatever spaces we work with? So yeah, we all have a role to play, and I think making this life livable, right, for queer and trans youth is definitely one of my top priorities. So, or at least better than how I lived, right, as a little bi girl. So thank you all so much. I love this space. And I hope to see you next month for the Fight Against the War on Youth.
Thank you
Bye,
so much.
everyone. If you want to get more involved, please email us at stoplapdspying@gmail.com, whether you want to get involved with any of our groups.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Chela.
See ya. Thanks, y'all.
Take care.